Hello students, here is what I'll be showing you how to create today, and it's a transect, which is basically a combination of a 3D model and a section and a perspective, and it's generally a helpful model to work with. And the scenario I'm thinking about here is that this would be a study model for a pedestrian bridge. I'm not going to design the bridge, but I've got all the context I need to do that to span the Red River of the North. And this is a real site. I'm using fairly accurate contours. This is somewhat of an advanced tutorial. I'll be moving pretty quick. So as always, I recommend you pause and rewind as necessary. Also, this is recorded in a high resolution, so dial up YouTube to the highest possible setting and you'll get the most out of this video. Now I'll be using AutoCAD. You have to have AutoCAD, you have to have SketchUp. I'll be doing a little bit in Photoshop as well. So those are the three tools you will want. And the first part I want to talk about is just collecting data. There's always this data collecting phase, and I always like to start with a high resolution base map, and USGS Earth Explorer is an excellent source for that. So I'll go ahead and type Fargo, North Dakota, where this is located, and I will zoom in. Also, I'm at the earthexplorer.usgs.gov, if you didn't notice. And hypothetically, I think it would be neat if there was a pedestrian bridge. You really should rationale this type of decision a little bit, and realistically, this would be a much larger GIS analytical tool, but for this example, I'm going to say I live over here and there's a golf course over here, so that's enough justification for me that there should be a pedestrian bridge right here to save me the trouble of having to pay on this toll bridge. And I also know the Moorhead Country Club has reconfigured the holes, so you know what? It's maybe not that unrealistic. But anyway, once you've found a site and you want to get some imagery in the Earth Explorer, you want to clear out this coordinate right here, and then just click 4 or 5. Doesn't really matter. This just allows you to define the area that you're interested in. And then you can continue to the data sets, all kinds of data you can access here. And I'm going to click on aerial imagery and click on high resolution ortho imagery. More times than not, that's what I jump to. Additional criteria, you can scroll through this, but I know that there is some half-foot resolution pixel data, so I want that. And what that means is each pixel in the returned image will be equal to half of a foot in real world size, which is a pretty good resolution. So let's continue to the results. And it found 8. There are 4 from 2011 and 4 from 2008. Why is there 4 for each year? Well, if you click the footprint, you might run into a situation like this where your site is kind of right at the 4 corners, and if you're lucky, the area you find will be right in the middle of these, so you only need to download 1 image. But in my situation, I need to download all 4 of these because I'll need to do some merging in Photoshop. Now, the registration is free. If you click this download button here and you're not logged in, you'll be prompted to make a login. I've already done that, and I'll jump over to Photoshop to show you what you need to do. Now, you could open up these images and manually assemble them in Photoshop, or you can click on File, Automate, and do a photo merge. This is much quicker, and it works really well with tiled information because these overlap just enough for this tool to be really effective. And I want to do a reposition. This has been in Photoshop since version 6, I believe. Let's go to my downloads. I've downloaded both the 2011 and the 2008. I want to do the 2008 because the 2011 imagery shows that area in a flood event, which for this, I want it to be a little bit more normal. Click open and click OK. All right, Photoshop has completed its thing, and it's a non-destructive process in that there's no resampling. These were only repositioned, and it very conveniently created the masks to give you a very seamless effect. And it's always a good idea just to do a quick visual audit to make sure it worked. Every now and then it'll shoot an image off. And just for a reference, you could always manually assemble this, but it gets to be kind of a pain in the butt lining things up. Let Photoshop do the heavy lifting for you. Once this is assembled, I can flatten or merge these layers because they are no longer needed. And what area is this covering? Well, you'll always find imagery that you don't know, and there are ways in SketchUp and AutoCAD to scale based off of known measurements. But because I know that this is half-foot resolution, if I look at my image size, I can see that it's 10,711 width. So half of that, 5,000 some odd feet, is the width, and it's pretty close to the height. So that's about a mile in height and width of the area. Now I'm just looking at a small area down here. So I could crop down to that area and jump straight to this size here, or about this size. But I'm always a fan of thinking a few steps ahead. This is exactly 500 feet by 1,500 feet. And I want this model to be exactly that. And because we are working with very precise data, we can do that. Now what I will do is crop this down to a smaller area just to lighten the processing load for Photoshop. And I want to warn you, with the crop tool selected, be careful you don't have the width by height by resolution option, because if that is set, you may inadvertently resample the image and thusly affecting the integrity of the pixel resolution. So I'm just going to do a normal crop to kind of get this down. And using the marquee tool, I'll set this to a fixed size of 3000 by 600 pixels. And you can just type that in. So I said 500 feet wide. I was wrong. That's only 300 feet wide, or at least the one I'll be creating will only be 600 or 300. How do I know that? Because half of 600 is 300. Each one of these is going to leave me a pixel that is half of a foot in size. And if I click in here, I can see my marquee tool. Let me zoom in, so hopefully that's easier to see. And once again, remember, you can crank this video up to a higher resolution playback if that is hard to see. So that's pretty close. But what if you want this to be at an angle and not straight across? If it's straight across, that's convenient. But what about like right up here where I want this to be angled? Well, you might know that there is a transform selection option, and that allows me to do just that. I can transform the selection, move it into place. But if I try to crop that, it still wants to crop to the horizontal and vertical height and width. So that won't work. Let me hit escape and go back, bring my marquee tool back. What I'm going to do is create a new layer and do an Alt Delete just to visually kind of give me something to see. And you know what, while we're here, let's put that at 50. I'll do a Command or Control D to deselect, and then I'll zoom out. And what I'll do is rotate the image relative to the part I want. So here's my image, and instead of a transform selection, I will go to Edit and do a free transform, or I can do Command T. Now, once you are here, be careful not to resize it like this. That would be bad because, again, of the resolution integrity we want to maintain. So let's undo. What you want to do is look for that little rounded double arrow icon and move it like this. Also, while you are doing this, be looking for landmarks, things that you'll be able to align data to contours or CAD data, because that's another step I'll be doing. And I do realize this stuff is georeferenced. So if you're a GIS stud, you could just dump all of this into ArcMap and everything would magically fall into place. This is a little bit more of a bootstrapping method, and some things that are good to align to are roads, center lines, structures, man-made water features, because those are a bit more controlled. So I'm looking at that little guy over here. Things that are not very good: river edges, tree edges, etc. Sometimes greens, golf courses are pretty good because they're fairly exact in their contours. Anyway, once I've got this kind of positioned, now that black area is the area I'm going to crop down. That will be exactly 300 feet by 1500 feet. And once this looks good, did I commit that? No, I didn't. So I need to hit return. That will commit that transform. And now I do realize the pixels were resampled. So it's okay. It's a little, you don't want to resample them too much, but by rotating, Photoshop really needed to recalculate each one of those square pixels, but they still equal half of a foot in length. So back to my layers, I'm going to click on Control, and click on that layer. Control or Command click, that will select the pixels in that layer. And then I can hit C on my keyboard to invoke the crop tool, and then hit return a couple times. Now I don't need that top layer anymore. Let's delete it. Here we go. I've got a very convenient area that's pretty good resolution, that is exactly 300 by 1500 feet in the area that it represents. And I can further confirm that by looking at my image size, and I can see that my width is 300 by 600 pixels. And once again, I know that those equal half of a foot because I got this from a very reliable source, the Earth Explorer website. Now is a good time to save this. I should have saved this a while back. Save early, save often. And I'm going to make a new folder called WHIP. When I'm working on a project, I like to do that. And then when it's complete, I'll change the name to something else like done. Oh, let's save this as a JPEG because I want it to be fairly readable in most applications. Let's call it study area. And on the resolution, I would recommend at least 10 for quality, because this is not something I'm really going to be opening it up and editing much more. So a compression format is not terrible. So that is one ingredient to create this model. We still need to find some contours and some trees, more on that later. And I've got this kind of dirt striation effect on the side. I'll be also talking more about that a little later. Incidentally, this is a very lightweight model. This clocks in at under 3 megabytes, and that includes the trees. And you know what? While I'm talking about those trees, let me show you why we want to do this. Here's a rendering using shader light, and I would get a similar effect basically with any of the many rendering applications you can use with SketchUp. And this is just a really quick one-click default rendering, and it's really not that bad. So these trees are from Land Effects, more on that later. And if you swap those out with some shader light trees, it's still a 3 megabyte file, and they render really nice. So I'll hopefully talk more about that when we get to the rendering phase. We're still in the data collecting phase. Well, where do you get contours? You can sometimes get them from federal sites like this. There's also the National Map Viewer. There's a handful of them out there, but the resolution is going to be pretty high. If you really want reasonable 1 foot or better contours, you have to search locally. And because of that, I'll just mention, look to your planning department in your community. And if they don't have a web portal, you may just need to contact some people and ask them. And the city of Fargo happens to have a pretty good portal where you can access images like this. And I'll go ahead and open one up. So 1 foot contours, here's the bowl of this area right here. And the nice thing about really good data is it's usually also geolocated. So again, if you had ArcMap and the ArcGIS desktop, you could jump right into that. But at the least, the data exists in the 3D model space in the correct location. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to open up some more, or rather I'm going to insert some additional contour data. And I'm just going to insert these as a block, not X-referencing. But this is really important. For the insertion point, and again, your results may vary depending on the source of your data, but it sure doesn't hurt to try this. I'll leave the default insertion point, scale, rotation, etc. And look what happens. It lines up perfectly. So that's pretty nice. I'll go ahead and import those other two. And this is the one thing about this walkthrough, is that you're going to need good contour data. And I'm not going to show everyone where to get every piece of contour data because I don't know. But now that these are in here, I need to explode these 3 because they were brought in as blocks. I'll type explode, select, 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 and hit enter. There we go. So this is going to get messy in a hurry. And I apologize for that, but it's the nature of working with this. Also, notice that I started with this file up here. I didn't start with a blank file and insert all of these individually. The reason for that is by starting with this one, all of the settings, the layers that are brought in, the metadata, etc., the units are all set, and it makes it really convenient for when we add an X reference other stuff. The beautiful thing about data like this is as long as it's got integrity, all the other data should align really well. And you know what, while we're talking about that, let me insert another piece of data that I got from the city of Fargo, and that's this one. This is base plan information that shows property lines, building footprints, etc. And the proxy information, I'll just click OK because I don't need it, but look at that. Now that also aligns perfectly, and I can start seeing these building footprints that if I jump back to Photoshop are right over here. So that'll be helpful. Back to AutoCAD. Let's insert that image. Now this one I'll do a little bit different. You can insert blocks, you can X-reference blocks, and you can attach imagery. So an image you want to attach. And I need to navigate to where I saved that image. And this one I'm going to intentionally just kind of arbitrarily place. And for this workflow, that makes sense. If I knew that this was scaled correctly, I could just place it and it would be fine. But for this little study area, I want to do it this way. And the reason is I know that from that edge to that edge is exactly 1,500 feet. And I can use the align tool in conjunction with a line. So I will type line, and I'm going to click here. I'm going to turn on my ortho by clicking down here as well. And I'll make this 1,500 units exactly and hit escape. So now a line, A-L-I-G-N, not L-I-N-E. I will snap these. Now, there are times you want to be very precise and there's times you need to guess. Here's a time where I need to be very precise. And if I do a shift right click, I can activate my quick endpoint. Shift right click, endpoint. There we go. Oh, whoops, let me back up. I did something wrong here. A-L-I-G-N, select my object, hit enter. I think I forgot the enter part. Now, shift right click, endpoint. That's my first point. Shift right click, endpoint up here. What's going on? Well, keep an eye on the command line down here because that's what I'm following. It's prompting me for what I need to select. Now it wants the second source point. So I'll go from here to here. Now it wants the third source point. Well, this is only 2D, so I'm just going to hit enter to continue. And the final question is, do you want to scale it or no? This time I want to scale it. And you'll see a difference here. Now this is exactly the right size relative to this area over here. Now I also realize you could import an image and crop it in AutoCAD, but there's a reason that you will hopefully see here why I'm doing this. Now we just need to align this to those landmarks that we previously identified, which was this water feature and a building footprint over here. And someone's calling me very early in the morning. All right, that was just a notification letting me know that school is canceled today because of a blizzard at the end of March in Fargo. Wonderful. Back to the drawing. All right, I'm going to draw some more helper geometries to the 2 points that I would like to align. So once again, line. And I'll pick down here. Now here's a situation where I'll turn off snap, my object snap, because this is more of guesswork. And I'm also going to turn off my ortho. So I'll go from the edge of that water to the edge of this house right about here. So there's my helper geometry that I will use to align over here. Once again, ALIGN, select that image. Interestingly enough, in AutoCAD, you have to click on the edge to select an image and hit enter. And once again, now I'm just following the prompts. Now, I'm kind of old school. I like to type my snaps, so I'll type END, hit enter, click here. Come over here. Now, very important, I don't want to snap. I just kind of want to eye this because this data exists in 3D space, and you run the risk of aligning this in 3D kind of a wonky mode. So just trust me, you don't want to snap when we're doing this part. That's my first point. My second point, I will type END again, click here. That's okay to snap because that's very precise. Over here, not okay to snap. You'll see why here in a moment. And that house was right about there. Third point, there is no third point. So I'll hit enter and scale objects. This time I'm going to say no. Now, if I didn't know the resolution or the size of that image, I would do yes. And this would be a fairly good approximation. But because I already calculated all that, and again, because of the image, that I know it's 1/2 foot resolution, I want to say no. And that brings it in. And let's take a look at a side view here. Here's why you don't want to snap, because this is the base plan information down here. There's my image, and here are my contours. And if I snapped as I was aligning that, I would run the risk of this image ending up kind of at a weird angle in here. That would be bad. So let's go back to a top view. And notice it's getting kind of weird here. Why are my base plan stuff showing up? Well, now it's not. The image, as you just saw, was below the contour data, but from this view, it looks like it's above. That's just an AutoCAD thing, and you want to do a command called draw order. Hit enter, and select that image, hit enter, and then select back. So that visually puts it in the back. AutoCAD's a little bit different. It primarily is meant to be worked, in my opinion, in 2D mode, even though you can and are working in a 3D space. But draw order will put that image in the background. Now we've really got a mess here. We've got a whole bunch of layers that we don't really need. And now we could enter into a cleanup phase. So now it's time to start really making this a little bit more digestible. I'll start by getting rid of that because I don't need it anymore. That's the base plan information. And I don't need these helper geometries over here, so I'll select those and hit delete on my keyboard. I'll probably make a couple layers by clicking here. To differentiate, we'll call it MC, and let's just call it MC for now. And what I want to do is put this layer, this image, in that MC. Oh, there's too many layers here. I need to clean this up. There we go. And these contours as well. Well, the contours are kind of a mess because there's different colors that mean things, but I'm just looking for a nice, clean contour. There's a whole bunch of things we don't want, like these numbers, these spot elevation points, etc. So a command that's really helpful is layer FRZ for layer freeze. This one you will use a lot, and that allows you to click on one thing and it will freeze everything in that layer. So keep an eye on this number down here as I click up here. goes away. That's nice. Hey, well, let's keep going. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of those. And visual inspection looks pretty good. If you accidentally click on something like this, oops, don't want that, you can do an undo, and that should bring that back. So now all I have turned on are the things I really want to keep, my image and my contours. So how do we get rid of everything else? Well, let's clean this up a little bit more with some more layers. Let's call it, how about MC Contours? And I'll make another one called MC Site. And maybe another one called MC Vegetation. You know what? While I'm here, let's give these some colors that make some sense. So vegetation will be green, site. Oh, how about blue? Contours, I'll do a darker gray. And this one, you know what? I'm going to rename this one. Oh, Arial. Because that's going to hold my image. And I'll go to a side view here. Because all that other junk is frozen, I don't need it, I can fairly easily select my contours in this view. Go to my Home tab on my ribbon. And here's normally where you see what layer it is in, but because there are multiple layers, that doesn't really matter. And I want to put my contours in MC Contours. There we go. And my site should be set to MC Arial. That's correct. I haven't created my site yet. And now we can start cleaning this up because we don't need all these things. Well, how do you do that? AutoCAD will not let you, in the PC version, delete a layer if there's stuff in it. In the Mac version, you can. So go Mac. Yeah, if you right-click, you have the option to delete everything. So you can't do that, but it's a fairly easy cleanup trick. And here's what I would recommend. I'm going to lock the 4 layers that I created. Then I'll turn on all of my layers or unfreeze them. Now I can do a Control A in my model space and hit delete on my keyboard. And that should get rid of everything that I don't want. But it doesn't get rid of your layers. And I did something wrong over here, so let's unfreeze those again. Once again, Control A, delete, and it sure looks like it got rid of more than I wanted it to. Why did it do that? Let's undo, because I see I've got some layers locked. I think I did something wrong here, so that happens when I'm trying to talk. It's like chewing gum and eating toast at the same time. All right, so I'm going to lock those 4 layers once again that I want to keep, the ones I created, that this data should be existing in. I've got everything unfrozen and everything is visible as well. There we go. Now in my model space, select all, hit delete. That's what I wanted to see. I don't want this stuff to go away. I'll go back to a top view. I've still got a whole bunch of layers that didn't go away, but now is when you can do a purge. And with the purge dialog, click purge all. Basically, how do you use this? You just keep clicking purge all until you can't click it anymore. Now everything went away. Even my locked layers. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't mean to do that. So it actually got rid of a locked layer. I learned something new. You can purge a locked layer. So I've got to recreate. That's spelled wrong, but that's all right. And how about MC, what was the other one? Site. All right, so now we're in business. You know what? Now's a good time to save this. I should have saved this a long time ago because I don't want to save over that contour data that I previously started with. So let's navigate to my work in progress and we'll call this site. There we go. Now's a good time to take a breather. How do we get from here to here? we're actually not too far away. And there's a few more steps that seem more complicated than what they are, but I will go ahead and show you them. And keep in mind, as I'm talking through them, it usually adds some time. I want to get rid of a whole bunch of contours, and you might be tempted to come in here and just start grabbing these and hitting delete. But you want to be careful about that, because some of these contours start up here and they extend into the area we want to keep. So if that's the case, you don't want to do that. You want to first be a little bit more surgical and identify an area that we can trim from. And I need to do that by creating a site. Let me unfreeze or unlock those. In my site layer, I will do a polyline, P-L-I-N-E, and I'm going to turn on my snaps, being very careful to snap to the four corners of the site image frame. This one's a little tricky because it's very close, and click there. All right, I can hit escape, and my colors got changed because I wasn't being careful before. But there we go. So now I've got a site, I've got my image, and I've got my aerial. I'll add the trees here in a moment. So the trim tool works really well. Let me show you one way, and then I'll show you an easier way. Trim is just TR and hit enter. And I can select that edge and then click right here and then hit enter and then click here again, and it trimmed that, but it trimmed a small segment because that's broken up. So now I need to click there. There we go. That's what we're shooting for. Let me show you an easier way to do that. First thing is orientation. Because I've decided to work with an angled image here, it'd be nice if that was rotated, and I could rotate it manually, but that's not going to quite be that easy. You want to create a new coordinate system, and you can do that by typing UCS and hit enter. And I'll show you a SketchUp equivalent here in a moment, but very important to be precise. I'll start on that edge, and I'm going to type NEA, hit enter for near. That's a nice snap that not many people use. NEA again, near. So that has created a coordinate system that's, you can kind of see it's in there. And look at my little navigation wheel. It's now at an angle. So if I click this arrow, oh, there we go. That's kind of nice, isn't it? Now the trim tool will be much easier to apply. All right, so TR again. Oh, I'm forgetting a couple steps. Let's do a polyline edit. And for this step, I'm going to turn off everything but my contours. All right, so here's my contours. PEDIT, polyline edit. And I'm going to draw a selection window around the area. I don't need to do all of them, just around my area. And in the polyline edit, there's lots of options here. So I'm going to hit escape and start over. Keep an eye on the command line as I do this. Polyline edit, enter. Well, I can do one, or I have an option for M for multiple. That is what I want to do. M, enter. Select my objects. All right, I will do that. I'll go ahead and select this area. Enter once again. Do you want to convert arcs to polylines? I sure do. So Y, enter. And now you have an option of things that you can edit a polyline. And the edit I want to do is join. So I'll click on J or hit J on my keyboard. The join type can be 0. And now you can hit escape. What did I just do there? Well, I've just made all of these where a polyline touches one another. They will be continuous. That makes this next step easier. Just trust me on it. I can turn these other layers back on, zoom in, and once again I'll do TR for trim. All you need to do is click on the site or the image frame edge, hit return. Now I can drag a window like such, and they go away. How nice is that? Drag, drag. Being careful not to go inside of the image. But you can see how this is much easier because I did the polyline edit and I changed my view. And you can zoom in here. I'm just using the mouse middle wheel button to navigate around this. You can't really use AutoCAD without a 3-button mouse, at least very efficiently. Getting a few of those smaller pieces. All right, that looks pretty good. Now we can start taking some bigger bites. I'm going to hit escape. And I'll do it this way. I'm just going to select, hit delete on my keyboard. Select, delete, and so on and so forth. Oops, you want to be careful there because I just grabbed the edges of those contours. Don't want that. Delete. I hit an incorrect key on my keyboard. Why is that being weird? Select, delete. It keeps on bringing up this other tool here. So what, you know what? You can also use erase. Enter. Select your objects and hit enter. And enter. Select your objects and hit enter. I don't know why my normal delete wasn't working, but once you get this far, now we can do some big old Cookie Monster size bites. Select, delete, select, delete. Keeping in mind, this is a very destructive process because now those contours are gone forever. I'm not just hiding them, they're toast. They're gone the way of the ether. All right, but keeping that in mind, this is a file that intentionally is meant to be chiseled down once again to get to this step here. Now we are really close, but going to go off on a little bit of a side note here and talk about some tools in SketchUp that work really questionably successful when working with contour data. One is this From Contour Sandbox tool. Now, if you bring in contour data, you can click on that and it makes topography. That's pretty nice. The other one is Simplify Contours, a plugin you can access and install from the extension warehouse. So just Google for more about those. But both of those together are kind of inefficient. You get kind of messy models, I think, and there's a better way to do it. And in fact, I've created an entire video just for this step called Better Simplify Contours in SketchUp with help from AutoCAD. For more information, you can Google that as well. But I'll quickly go through it here. And I'm going to use a Lisp, which is kind of like a plugin, except it's for AutoCAD. And when you have a Lisp, when you find one, and I've found this one here called Polyface or polyfit.zip, which is from polyface.de. It's a really cool Lisp that you'll see here in a moment. Download, extract that. This is the same process for any Lisp that you find. Once you know where they are on your computer, in AutoCAD, you type app load, hit enter, navigate to where that is downloaded to, select the Lisp and hit load. And it's saying it's an executable. Do you trust it? No, I guess I trust this one. Hit close. What did that do? Well, that gives me temporary access to a new tool called Polyfit. Type Polyfit, there it is. And now you can do some stuff to contours. Well, what are we going to do to them? These contours, and I just hit escape here. I'll jump back to that Polyfit here in a moment. And you know what? Just to keep this a little bit easier, I'm going to turn off everything. These contours are kind of sporadic. There's lots of arbitrary points. Some contours have a lot, some don't have many. And this creates a very triangulated topographic model. Polyfit will allow you to segment these out either by a set amount or by a set length. What does that mean? Well, let's type it in and try it out. Polyfit, hit enter. Once again, keep an eye on your command line for the next step. Select objects. I'm going to select my contours, hit enter. Now it defaults to number equals 10, meaning if I were to hit enter, regardless of the length, it would turn each one of these into a 10 length or 10 segment line, and that's not what I want. So I will hit L, enter. Now I can specify the length of the curve. This is really trial and error. Keep in mind, because we are working towards more of a visual representation, not so much a grading contour plan, you've got some liberties here to be a little rough. So number or length of curved sections, well, let's try, how about 20? That might be pushing it, but let's see how it looks. This will really depend on the scale of the size you are working with. And if I zoom in here, I can see the original, and I can also see the ones that will be generated. And you know what? I'm going to hit escape a couple times here. Oh, that's kind of interesting. It didn't. I hit escape, but it registered the tool. That's no good. So let's do an undo, 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 undo. There we go. I'm back to here, and just ignore that. Why did I want to back out? Because I'm going to create a new layer and call this MC segment contour. And I'll make that a different color. I'll make it yellow, or how about orange? Why not orange? There we go. And I'll make that my default layer. Why did I do that? Okay, you'll see here in a moment. Polyfit once again. Select the objects. Hit enter. It still has my length equal to 20 because that's the last variable I entered. I'll hit enter. Here's why I changed it to a new layer, because now it's putting these new contours in their own layer, which is always nice. And it's easier to preview the changes. So if you don't like this, you can hit undo and escape and whatnot and go back. But this looks pretty good. Some of these were reduced down to just one segment. That's okay. And you can see here you're really getting a lot of bang for your buck out of areas like this. So delete source object, because it is in its own original layer. I will hit N for no, and I'll move on. So here's my contours. I can unfreeze. Let's set to layer 0 as my default. Unfreeze. Now I can turn off my segments that I just created. Freeze them, unfreeze, and with the other ones as well. So that's how I'm always a fan of being non-destructive, I guess, when the opportunity arises. But you want to, again, visually audit this just to make sure that none of these are overlapping. That's a problem that often happens with the Simplify Contour plugin. If I go to a side view here, I can see that these are still living happily in the correct elevation. Top view looks good. All right, you know what? Now we're almost ready to go to SketchUp. But we need to add some trees, some vegetation. And for this step, I'm going to turn off my contours. And we'll insert some blocks as trees. You can create your own. There's all kinds of tree blocks out there. But for my students at NDSU, you guys maybe remember from a couple assignments ago, we created some trees. And I'm going to browse to some that I created. And there we go. How about tree deciduous? A little bit of review for my students and just some general information for everyone else. This time, I do want to specify my insertion point. I do want to specify my scale. I do want it to be uniform, and I do want to specify my rotation. Why do you want to do this? Well, because you can come in here and click to place, click again to set, and click again to set the rotation. And if you right click, hit OK, you can do this for each one of these trees. And you can make them close to their size. Well, that would take a while to go through and do that for each individual tree. I'll just do a couple more over here. What I like to do, depending on the process, is get a few of a different size. Oh, and you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to put these in the vegetation layer. So let's do that. My vegetino layer, and we'll make that greenish. There we go. So let's make that the default layer. I just kind of like to get a few in there, and then I'll use the copy tool, because we could set the rotation and orientation for all of these. They're kind of hard to see, but I'm just going to kind of guess here to be. And there's a whole bunch over here. Let's just kind of shotgun plant those. I'll show you a trick in SketchUp that's kind of nice for rotating and randomizing these. I got some big trees. I'll go back and grab this guy and do some small ones. Maybe there's a couple of small ones in here and so on. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to insert that coniferous or evergreen, keeping the default settings, and I'll quickly copy these. Now, here's a situation where you probably don't want your snaps turned on if you know you've got information existing in different layers. It's not the end of the world, but well, let's see. I know these aren't exactly the right trees, but maybe the deadline is in a half hour and you really got to crank this out. And just gonna hope the client doesn't notice. All right, so now we've got some vegetation, we've got some contours, we've got our site, and we've got all kinds of good stuff. I'm going to turn off and in fact, for this example, I'm just going to delete the heavy weight contours. Why am I going to do that? Well, because I don't really need them, and for the sake of this exercise, it'll work. Now I can turn on these other ones. If I do a purge, a little bit of review here again, we should see that contour layer go away. Purge all, close this, and it didn't go away. That's because it's my active layer. Let's try this. Purge all, close. There, goodbye. It went away. I've got myself a nice clean model that's almost ready to go to SketchUp. Is it? I think it is. So let's save this. Here's another tip. I like to save things with incremental numbers, and oftentimes I'll put the date behind it. So what's today's date? I think it's February 64th or March 31st, something like that. Let's do that instead. So the reason I do that is because if you save over and over and over the same file and that file gets corrupt, speaking from experience here, it's not good time. So if I save iterations and this one gets corrupt, I could always go back to the previously numbered version, and that works well. Also, you may need to save down to another layer or another format depending on the version of SketchUp. If you've got SketchUp 2013, do 2010. If you've got SketchUp 8, maybe all the way down to 2000. Otherwise, it won't be able to be inserted. Let's go to SketchUp, and I'll start a new file here. And I will insert or import that CAD drawing. Be sure to tell SketchUp. It's not smart enough to know what you want to insert, so you have to say, I'm going to insert an AutoCAD drawing. And I want this one, import. Here's what works and what doesn't. It brings in basically everything that you've been drawing. It does not bring in images, so that's good to keep in mind. It converts all of your components or all of your blocks to components, and that's really helpful because if I edit any one of these, it edits all of them. Let's get rid of that line there and see how that deletes on everything. That's nice. Let's hit escape. Okay, it brings in the contours. That's nice. Here's why we did that polyfit. If I select these, it's only 1600 edges. Had I brought those in without doing any polyfit Lisp in AutoCAD, that would have been more like 10,000, which starts to get heavy in a hurry. But Once this is here, and because, remember, I said there was a reason I wanted to crop this down to exactly 1500 by 300 feet, this image, and it's still saved. Now I can insert that or place it right in here. But kind of like typing UCS in AutoCAD, I'm going to click on this tool over here, the axes, that effectively sets my coordinate system, and I'll click on those points. So that kind of does the same thing. And the reason for that is now I can import that image, and I need to tell it all supported image types, study area, and very conveniently I will snap to here. So we're in a bit of a reconstruction phase. We can rebuild it. And I'm going to move this image. Now we're in SketchUp. You really need to trust the inferencing and be paying attention to the colors that you see. For example, here I'm making sure I'm staying in the blue axes. I just want this to be above this area here. And I actually don't need this edge anymore because it aligns perfectly with that edge. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Why did I do that? Well, now I can select this vegetation and move that up as well. So this is setting itself up really well to start applying these other tools in SketchUp, from contour and maybe simplified contour. There's a few others I will use in here. But let me open my layers. I should have mentioned this sooner. Layers, it imports the same layers that you had in AutoCAD, but keep in mind these function very differently and you can run into some headaches. I've gotten in the habit of keeping everything separated in 3D space. That makes things easier, so I can quickly, for example, take my contours on and off, my site on and off. Well, because I deleted that site, there's nothing in the site. My aerial, once again, that there was nothing in that layer that was brought across in AutoCAD that contained my image. But you know what? We're just going to close this up. I just wanted to show you that it does bring along the structure. All right, back into SketchUp world here. I'm going to explode this image. Whenever you insert an image, it kind of comes in with its own special little container. You need to explode it in order to do a few of these next steps. Now, I could jump straight into the From Contour tool. In fact, let's do that. Let's click it. You will see this little tool grinding along here at the bottom with the progress bar down here, that is. And when this completes, it'll take that area that I have selected and turn them into contours, which kind of is nice, but here's a problem. The edges, it doesn't know the extents of your model, and I want this to be a very clean model that goes to the very edge like that. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you need to back up or delete that. I need to create some helper geometries, and because this is all existing in 3D space, if I look in a top-down view and change my camera view to parallel projection, I can see that everything is aligned, and that is very nice. Because now I can take the line tool and I'll start a line here. In my blue direction, I'm going to hold down Shift to lock that, and I'm going to infer from this closest contour. Why did I do that? Well, now I can draw a little helper geometry, being very careful to stay in the red or the green axis direction. I don't want to be off in kind of blue or arbitrary space. And then I will erase this line here. Why did I do that? Well, when I do the From Contour tool, which incidentally is a sandbox tool, should have mentioned that sooner perhaps, but oh well. It will know to create the contours all the way to that corner. And I'll do the same thing over here. Line, blue direction, hold down Shift, and little helper edge right there. 2 more corners to go. And depending on if there is a rise in contour, here's a little trick you might want to do. So I'll draw this little helper geometry here and erase that. I'm using some shortcut keys here. Just keep an eye on my toolbar to see which tools I'm using. Once again, somewhat of an advanced tutorial, but okay, so these contours go up, and if this piece were a foot, that probably wouldn't make sense, because otherwise you'd see another contour line in here. So sometimes, you don't have to, but because I'm a perfectionist, I will raise that up maybe half of a foot. So I just typed 0.5 feet, enter. So that will take the contours from here and they will rise up to that point there. So that should now give me a really nice from contour model. If I select all of those contours, activate from contour, and let SketchUp do its thing. There we go. If we turn on our hidden geometry, you can see how this thing was triangulated, and it looks pretty nice. Now, there were a few other peaks and valleys and ridges. I maybe should have came in and drew some helper geometries, but for the most part, it's not bad. Like right up here, there might have been, that's actually modeled perfectly flat, but maybe there's a little bit of a height there. But that's okay. This is not too shabby. So let's turn off hidden geometry. There's a few other things you need to do. Now, any tool from the sandbox toolbar creates a group. So if you double click on that group, you can edit it independent of everything else. Another thing I like to do is to turn off the rest of the model when I'm in component edit mode. So I'm editing, everything is out of sight, out of mind. If I go back to here, I can now see the rest of my model. Once again, editing. That just helps visually keep your bearings. Okay, if you're really lucky, you can, from the four corners of this newly created topography, draw some lines. So I'll draw another line in the blue direction, snap to this edge, and again, if you're really lucky, it will create a surface. But because there's slight irregularities in how all of these tools are processed, and we're really building up kind of a lot of tools, sometimes you're not so lucky. So let's try it on this side. Oh, that one I did actually got really lucky. I've never been able to do this on all four sides. So on your model, go ahead and try this. Snap. Oh man, that's a sign it's going to be a good day. There we go. Well, this is a situation where it doesn't cause a problem when I actually want it to. But if you can do this and you got a nice shape, good for you. But if not, you have to go back and find out where the problem is, because sometimes little weird things like that happen where the contours are kind of doing some funky stuff. So go ahead and try that. If that works, good for you. If not, here's a quick fix. It's a little kind of hacky, but it'll solve the problem if the goal is to kind of have this nice solid group model here. All right, back to here. Let's turn off hidden geometry. Here's what I do. I'll take this shape here, double click, and hold down Shift and click on the image to just select the edge. Then I will take the offset tool, and I'm going to offset that a little bit. You might have a little trial and error in here. I'll just do 1 foot, and look what that did. It offset that 1 foot. Then I'm going to select this interior image, or it's just a face, that's all it is. It just happens to be painted with an image. And I'm going to do an edit and copy. Now, back here, I will edit this model or this component, edit, and paste in place. Very important that you paste that exactly where it was, but now I'm inside of the component. And finally, I'll take the push-pull and go all the way through. You got to punch this all the way through. That is really important. And you know what? I'm going to undo because those colors are going to be confusing. So let's do this. Let's grab the paint bucket and just give that a different color. Now, push pull. Whoops, wrong way. Make sure you push all the way through. Don't snap to something here. We can fix this here in a moment. Why did I do that? Well, now you can zoom, 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 and grab that topographic surface. Also, make sure you do not have hidden geometry turned on. That will be problematic. Hidden geometry is off. I've selected the surface. Right click and go to intersect with model. And that will take that surface, and wherever it intersects the model conveniently creates geometries. Now I can click this surface and hit delete, and you can triple click on that edge and hit delete as well. Zoom on out. Grab the eraser tool, get rid of these top edges here, and maybe push pull this to a desired height. So this gives you a good sense of the elevation change, which is convenient. It's kind of a nice thing to look at. And if you're really lucky, it will create a solid group. That is really helpful because now you can apply any of the solid tools. Maybe more on that in another video. So also, if you're going to send this to a 3D printer, you really want it to be airtight or a solid group. So bonus points if that's a solid group. Okay, now what are some final steps here? Let's paint this or apply this texture to that model. And that's pretty easy. Grab the paint bucket, bring up your eyedropper either by holding down Alt or Command if you're on a Mac, and paint it on here. And whoops, you don't want to do that because it looks horrible. You want to make sure that you are inside of the component before you apply that texture, and everything should drape beautifully down. All right, let's hit escape. We got some trees to swap out. Let's get rid of this. We don't need that one anymore. And we want these trees to fall and land on here. Now, a little bit of overlap from a previous video. If you watched this one, AutoCAD to SketchUp with contours and 3D tree swapping, it's kind of the same process. So maybe you are familiar with that procedure. If you are, you might be able to just not watch the rest of this video and start doing that. But there's a few other things I want to do. One is to swap these out with other components. And I want to kind of arbitrarily randomize them so they aren't all exactly the same. And then I want to drop them. And honestly, you can do this in really any order. How about we'll do the randomization step first. I'll bring up my component browser, right click on that component and select instances, and it does just that. Now I will use a Chris Fulmer scale and rotate multiple, scale and rotate randomly. This is available from the extension warehouse. So go there, get this plugin. It's really great. This dialog, well, I'll do minimum of 0.9 and a maximum of 1.1. And if I do a 360 scale about axes, you need to know that these are all around the center point. So there we go. Those are all rotated. That's good news. Let's do the same thing with these other tree pieces. And I'll do the same, 1.1, 360. There we go. So those are all set. Now we want to swap these out with better trees. And you could go to the 3D warehouse and search for trees, but it's a lot of junky trees out there. Some are way too large, some are way too small. Land Effects has some really great trees, a really cool software application that works well with AutoCAD and SketchUp workflow. But if you search for the Student 3D Design Contest Land Effects, you will find some example trees here. So those work really well, and they've also released some other ones. And those are the trees I'm going to swap out with these. There's actually a whole bunch of ways you can do this. Keep an eye on the size. And in fact, what I'm going to do here is copy this one tree. You'll see why here in a moment. And you can do this from the component browser. I could right click and reload, or you can do it from the viewport, right click, reload, and navigate to a tree. I've already downloaded those land effects trees, and I'm going to select maple tree. Hit open. And it swaps them all out. Well, why did I copy that one? Because I'm going to go and do paste in place. That put it back in there. The size is a little off. I want these to all be, maybe 20% larger, 30% larger. Here is a situation where we can use the Chris Fulmer scale and rotate uniformly, but we need to select all those trees first. So I'll right click in my component browser, select all of those newly reloaded trees, and Chris Fulmer tool, scale and rotate uniformly. And I want this to be on the base, otherwise the trees are going to go down into space. And I want my scale factor to be 120, or is it 1.2? We're going to find out here in a moment. And I don't want to rotate. All right, that worked. So that made them a little bit larger. That's not bad. I might go just a hair bit bigger. 1.1 relative to its current size. All right, that looks pretty good. Oh, a tiny one in there. Now I'll get rid of this helper tree there. All right, let's do the same thing with the evergreens. I'll do these a little bit different. I will, you know what, let's do it this way. In fact, yes, I've got an idea. I'm going to insert a SketchUp model. So we've inserted a CAD file, we've inserted an image. Now I will insert a SketchUp file. And out of those sample trees, I'm going to go ahead and do this concolor fir. And I'm going to place it. But something weird is happening. Look at my insertion point. I want to snap it to the center of here, but it's kind of being weird on me. Why is that? Well, if you edit this component, look at where the component base is at. That is problematic because if we randomly rotate these, it's going to rotate around that axis point, which is going to give you this kind of effect here. Where can I duplicate it? I guess I can't. I was going to try to rotate this tree here. Let's do it this way. It'll do that, where it rotates like that, and we want it to rotate around the base. Well, to fix this, we need to either move this tree in component edit mode, or we need to move the axes. Either one will work. I will move the axes, and I'm going to kind of go to a top or a bottom up view, right click over here and select change axes. Now I can click on that base and click a couple more times, edit out, and let's get my bearings back down here. Now if I delete that tree and just bring it back in from my component browser, look at that. Now it's snapping to the correct location. And same as before, you can swap these out or change the size before or after. It looks like they need to be about 150% larger. So let's just quickly do this. Let's select the evergreen, select instances. That selects all of the instances in my model. And this is different than before, just showing you there's lots of ways to do this. I'm going to now right click on that fir and select replace selected. Oh, and that's kind of weird. It made them larger. So I guess I don't need to resize them as I thought I did. So that looks pretty good. What's the next step? We need to drop those down. So I can close that. Zoom on out. Select these trees. I don't think this one is from the extension warehouse. I think I got the drop one from Smustard. Smustard.com, excellent source for plugins. And it's called Drop CG, or maybe it's just Drop. There we go, Drop CG, free is good. Download and install that. Google how to install plugins. I apologize, I don't have time to show how to do the manual installation. But with that plugin, you can select components, right click, and then select drop CG. And they should drop straight down and land on your model. Sometimes they don't. You know what? So just because it didn't, that's concerning. I'm going to save this, which I should have done a long time ago. I think I would have learned by now, but let's call this transect. Right click, drop. There we go. Sometimes it gets confused. Right click, drop. Perfect. What I'm working towards here also, there's always a few things you really want to keep in mind. One, what are you doing with this model? And as I mentioned, this is really just a study model, but we're getting a lot of bonus things out of this. It's very lightweight. That is good. It's a solid group. That's also really good. These components are easily swappable. That is also very good. It's kind of got all things going for it that we really need. And these contours, you know what? How do I just select those contours? Because I want to color those so they're not this heavy, heavy black. And how do you do that? Well, let's see here. I guess I didn't really think that through, did I? Let's select everything. And then let's do... You know what? I'll just skip over the coloring. In the past and in this example here, I showed you how to color the contours so they're a little bit more subtle. This time I'll just leave them kind of heavy. They do help with the communication of this model, the visual communication. But I do want to add a little bit more, kind of a nice little touch, that kind of dirt effect on the side. So this, I believe, is the last thing I'll be doing. And I'll start with a new file in Photoshop. It doesn't need to be large, so I'll just do a width of even 100 pixels and a height of 600 pixels. That gives me this shape. And with the gradient tool, you can click up here and select a gradient that looks good. You know what? I'll just do this one. And then click again right on the gradient, and you can bring up the gradient editor. So here's what I did to create that dirt effect. I'll just make that one dark. You know, you can kind of play around with this, and this one goes over here, and we'll make that kind of that color there. And I don't know why it's still white. There we go. So that looks good. Maybe take that a little bit further. Okay. Then apply the gradient and save this as something that you can insert as a file into SketchUp. And how about we do JPEG again? So I'm really covering all of the ways you can insert things in both AutoCAD and SketchUp. I'm zooming in, editing this model, and I will go to File, Import. This time, I'm going to be sure to select Use as Image and Use as Texture, supported image types, and then Import as Texture. That's really important. Dirt texture. Now when I import this, I don't want to snap it to here because that might not be the highest point in my model. So I want that image to intentionally go a little bit higher. Not that high. Maybe like that right there. Okay. So that will make it not repeat. Now I can sample that. And once it's sampled, I can just paint it all the way around. That looks pretty good. And what's maybe the final step? Well, let's reset this axis. We set that a long time ago. With the select tool, right click kind of out on the edge and click on reset. And you know what? Let's go to AutoCAD because I should show you how to return this. When you create a custom coordinate system in AutoCAD, you just click here and you go to WCS, which stands for World Coordinate System. Back to SketchUp. Why did I do that? Well, now I can select this whole thing and move it down to the axis so it is sitting on the ground, and it's pretty much good to go. At this point, you could model a bridge, you could export this to a renderer, you could take your model and do some stuff and take it to a 3D printer because it's very conveniently a solid group. All kinds of things you can do with this. If you don't want those contours to be visually as loud as they are, you can disable profile view. So there we go. And let's turn on perspective mode. Now we can just have some fun with it. Again, very lightweight. Let's save this. A couple last minute steps that I always like to do with my models is to purge them, both in AutoCAD and in SketchUp. And in SketchUp, if you go to Window, Model Info, Statistics, you can select Purge Unused, and you should see these numbers go down. Let's save this and see how that clocks in for file size. 2.4 megabytes, not too shabby. At this point, I've rewarded myself enough to call this complete. And there you go. You have hopefully created a fun little transect using a few ingredients: AutoCAD, SketchUp, Photoshop, etc. Any questions? Please ask.